Hello folks, tonight we drift down the Nile on perfumed water, under skies smeared with heat and politics. The sails above you are purple. The crew rowing beside you smells like myrrh, ambition, and a little bit of fish. And in the middle of this floating fever dream, standing with one foot on history and the other on drama, is Cleopatra. Not the cartoon version. Not the overblown Hollywood version. The real one. Sharper, stranger, smarter, and far better at public relations than any influencer you follow. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. You are not ready for how good Cleopatra is at making an entrance. This woman does not walk into rooms. She sails into geopolitical situations with scented sails and trained musicians playing what can only be described as seductive flute jazz. She is not here to ask permission. She is here to make every senator in Rome question their life choices. Born in 69 BCE, Cleopatra VII does not just inherit a throne, she inherits a dynasty with more family drama than 10 seasons of reality television and far less moral compass. The Ptolemaic dynasty, her family line, had been ruling Egypt ever since Alexander the Great died, and someone handed a Greek man a very large and very sunburnt kingdom. They were known for speaking Greek, marrying each other, and losing control of their facial expressions during sibling arguments. And yes, when she ascends to the throne, she is supposed to co-rule with her little brother, who is also her husband. Yes, that is exactly as strange as it sounds. And no, you do not get used to it. But Cleopatra is not about to let some tween with a gold hat get in her way. She quickly discovers that palace life is less about governance and more about who can survive the latest round of backstabbing disguised as family dinner. Eventually, she gets kicked out of Alexandria and exiled. So what does she do? She does not sulk. She does not write passive-aggressive scrolls. She goes out, gathers an army, and waits for the next Roman power struggle to float downriver. Enter Julius Caesar. Now, Caesar is not exactly in the market for a dramatic queen with eyeliner that could slice marble, but Cleopatra is not the type to care about what people are or are not looking for. She sneaks into the royal palace, allegedly rolled up in a carpet, or a laundry sack, or something equally theatrical, and pops out like a diplomatic jack-in-the-box. Historians still argue about the packaging, but everyone agrees Caesar was impressed, possibly terrified, definitely interested. They strike up a partnership. You might call it a romance. She calls it a power merger. The two of them tour the Nile, hold meetings, and produce a child, Caesarion, also known as Little Caesar, who comes with zero pizza and a mountain of political implications. Cleopatra is now officially the mother of the would-be heir of Rome. That is leverage with a side of strategy. But then, things in Rome take a turn. Caesar is stabbed approximately way too many times by his best frenemies in the Senate. Cleopatra, sensing that Rome is about to get very weird and very unsafe for women who have been dating dead dictators, returns to Egypt. She mourns, certainly, but mostly she regroups. Then comes Mark Antony. Mark Antony is loud, loyal, hot-headed, and about as subtle as a flaming chariot crashing through a wedding. Cleopatra meets him when he summons her to discuss politics. She shows up on a floating temple, dressed as the goddess Isis, surrounded by servants fanning her with feathers and perfume, while musicians play soft background tracks labeled "Crush His Will to Resist." Antony, of course, does not resist. They become a power couple instantly. Think Beyonce and Julius Caesar's replacement, with less dancing and more invading Armenia, they throw legendary parties. They mint coins with their faces on them. They have multiple children. They literally divide the known world like it is a holiday timeshare. Back in Rome, this goes over like a sandstorm in a wine shop. Octavian, later known as Augustus, is Caesar's heir and the kind of man who sends passive-aggressive birthday scrolls. He launches a PR campaign painting Cleopatra as a wicked temptress corrupting the noble Roman Antony. People believe it. Because honestly, she is just that fascinating. Rome declares war, the Battle of Actium happens. If this were a film, this would be the tragic third act where everything catches fire, and it does. Sort of. Cleopatra's fleet is cornered. Antony's decisions become erratic. Their strategy crumbles. They flee back to Egypt. It is quiet now. Alexandria, once a hub of knowledge, silk, wine, politics, and gossip, stands still. Antony, hearing a false rumor that Cleopatra is dead, decides to die dramatically. He stabs himself. It does not go well. In fact, it takes a while. Cleopatra finds him, bleeding and melodramatic, and pulls him into her arms as he dies. Tragic, yes. Practical, not even a little. She knows what is coming. Octavian is at the gates. He wants her to march through Rome as a chained-up trophy queen, the final humiliation before disappearing into some villa prison where no one ever remembers your name. Cleopatra has a different plan. Now we get to the snake story. You have heard it. Basket, asp, drama, curtains. But here is the thing. Historians still are not sure. It was a snake. Poison, concealed blade, a home-brewed herbal concoction so powerful it could down a hippo. All plausible, all possible, all very on brand. Because if Cleopatra is going to die, she is going to make sure it is legendary. She dies in her mausoleum, surrounded by gold, incense, and defiance, not begging, not apologizing, just done. And Egypt, taken by Rome, Caesarion, executed, her children with Antony, taken to Rome and absorbed into the empire like everything else. But here is the twist. Cleopatra, erased by the victors, slandered by Roman propaganda, reduced to stereotypes for centuries, still survives, not in body, but in memory, in legend, in the thousands of portraits, poems, films, and conspiracy theories she inspired. She is the only woman in ancient history who made men rewrite maps for her without lifting a sword. She ruled not with brute force, but with personality, wit, showmanship, and a working knowledge of how not to make your eyeliner smudge in 40-degree desert heat. And she was funny. Probably. You do not seduce Rome with just incense and syntax. You need timing, confidence, and the ability to tell when the moment needs a joke, a jab, or just complete and total silence. Also a strange beauty tip. Cleopatra allegedly made a face mask out of sour milk and honey. The sour milk contained lactic acid, which works as a natural exfoliant. Yes, she had a skincare routine that involved ancient dairy. Yes, you are allowed to be impressed. Another thing? She may have written medical and alchemical treatises, none of which survived, but were referenced by later physicians. Imagine being intelligent enough to run Egypt, seduce Rome, and still have time to write your own skincare manual, and about those coins. Cleopatra put her own face on currency. That was rare. Most queens were footnotes or appendages. She was the feature. Her nose was prominent, her features were strong, not airbrushed or idealized, because she was not trying to be pretty. She was trying to be remembered, and she was. Her tomb has never been found. Maybe it is beneath the Mediterranean, swallowed by time and waves. Maybe it is still under Alexandria, waiting. Maybe it never existed in the way we imagine. Maybe she did not need a tomb. She had a legacy. Tonight, you float back down the Nile in your imagination. The stars above are unfamiliar, older, sharper, unspoiled by electricity or light pollution. You can still smell the perfume drifting from the barge. You can still hear the soft rustle of papyrus scrolls being opened, read, rewritten. And you think maybe history did not fail Cleopatra. Maybe she planned it this way. Maybe she wanted to be misunderstood, argued over, adored, hated, immortalized. Because in the end, she was never trying to survive the men around her. She was trying to outlive them, and she actually did. The first thing you notice is the dust, fine, ancient, and absolutely everywhere. It clings to your boots, your skin, your thoughts. You squint up at a sky that cannot decide between drizzle and doom, and that is when you see her. Eleanor of Aquitaine. Not lounging. Not sipping tea. She is on horseback, charging through history, like someone forgot to tell her she was supposed to sit quietly and embroider in a tower. She does not wave, she does not pause. You either keep up or you get trampled by her timeline. Eleanor is not born to blend in. She arrives in 1122, the Duchess of Aquitaine, one of the wealthiest and most powerful regions in France, and possibly the only toddler with a personal minstrel. Her land is basically the medieval version of a golden ticket, vineyards, castles, rebellious nobles, and enough tax revenue to fund questionable crusades for years. Her father dies when she is just 15, and suddenly she is the most eligible, dangerously independent heiress in Europe. She is married off faster than you can say political alliance, and just like that, she is Queen of France. Now, Louis VII is, how to put this gently, he is not Eleanor's type. He is pious, painfully earnest, and mostly wants to pray and walk barefoot through holy places. Eleanor wants courtly love, wine, poetry, and the occasional morally questionable adventure. Their marriage is rocky from the beginning. She tries to jazz up the court with music and troubadours. He tries to organize pilgrimages. You can imagine the marital tension. Then comes the Second Crusade. Eleanor does not stay home. Of course not. She insists on coming along and brings 300 hand-picked female warriors dressed like Amazons. Yes, that actually happened. Historians still argue whether they fought or just gave the French knights something to gossip about. But either way, Eleanor rides into the Middle East like the world's most dangerous tourist. Somewhere near Antioch, she and her uncle get very close, close enough for rumors to explode faster than medieval wine casks in the sun. Louis is not thrilled. The crusade goes terribly. They return to Europe without glory or much of a marriage. And in a rare moment of medieval legal clarity, the Pope grants them an annulment. Official reason? No sons. Unofficial reason? He probably just wanted the drama to stop. Eleanor is 30, single, rich, and very aware that every noble with a heartbeat wants to marry her, own her land, and probably die accidentally in a hunting accident 6 months later. She needs someone who will not try to turn her into an obedient houseplant. So she picks Henry, yes, that Henry Plantagenet, 10 years younger, smart, temperamental, and the kind of man who would absolutely start a bar fight over inheritance laws. They marry. 2 years later, he becomes King of England, so now Eleanor is Queen of France and Queen of England. She is also still Duchess of Aquitaine. That is 3 hats. That is a lot of borders. And frankly, that is a logistical nightmare for any courier trying to deliver her mail. Together, Eleanor and Henry produce 8 children, which seems impressive until you meet those children. The Plantagenet kids are less of a family and more of a medieval rock band that constantly fights and sometimes stabs each other. There is Richard the Lionheart, John, yes, that John, Geoffrey, Eleanor, and a few others who are mostly remembered for participating in civil wars or having excellent hair. Eleanor rules Aquitaine independently. She governs, she reforms, she plays political chess at a level that would make Machiavelli cry into his wine. Henry, meanwhile, expands the Angevin Empire, yells at clergy, and possibly invents the royal tantrum. Their relationship sours, and not in a passive-aggressive silence at dinner kind of way. At one point, Eleanor supports her sons in rebelling against their father, as in she funds them, writes letters, possibly hosts strategy dinners. Henry finds out and locks her up for 16 years. 16! You begin to feel sorry for her, but then you realize she is using that time to quietly rebuild her influence. When Henry finally dies, probably exhausted, Richard becomes king. The first thing Richard does, he frees his mother. That is how powerful she still is. At this point, she is pushing 70, and instead of retiring to a castle full of cats, she becomes de facto ruler of England, while Richard goes off on crusade. Let us pause for a second. Eleanor is now an elderly woman in an age where most people do not live long enough to regret their haircut. She governs England, she arranges royal marriages, she negotiates hostage deals, she probably intimidates entire rooms just by raising one eyebrow. Modern politicians can barely answer emails. Eleanor is out here organizing empires from a horse, a quirky detail. She once ran a court of love. Picture a gathering where noblewomen debate which knight behaved the most romantically, and Eleanor rules on whether someone's poem was heartfelt or just creepy. Historians still argue whether these courts were real, symbolic, or just a very elaborate way to roast men for being emotionally unavailable. Anyway, Eleanor outlives most of her children. She outlives 2 husbands. She outlives more scandals than most soap operas. She finally dies at the age of 82, which in medieval years is roughly the equivalent of being a time traveler. She is buried at Fontevraud Abbey next to Henry because fate has a dark sense of humor. Her tomb shows her holding a book, not a scepter, not a rosary, a book. Because in a time when women were expected to obey, to fade into background tapestries, Eleanor rewrote the rules. She was not a pawn, she was the hand moving the pieces. And every time someone tried to define her, she expanded the definition of what a queen could be. Now picture this, a hall in Poitiers. The candles are flickering. A harp plays softly in the background. Nobles argue about whether true love means suffering or serenading. Eleanor leans back in her chair, sipping wine that cost more than your car, and passes judgment like the queen of feelings she is. She rides through Aquitaine, cloaked in velvet, issuing decrees and possibly fixing the harvest with one raised eyebrow. Everywhere she goes, power gathers. Not because she demands it, but because she embodies it. Authority, not as noise, but as gravity. And she never once apologizes for being difficult, or brilliant, or uncontainable. She is not easy to summarize, she is not neat, she is not polite. She is history's middle finger to the idea that women should sit still and smile. And when the dust settles, after the betrayals, the crusades, the castles, and the prisons, what remains is this. Eleanor ruled, loudly, softly, strategically, completely. You lean back now, the flicker of torchlight in your memory. The road behind her is littered with kings, lovers, letters, wars, and somewhere just ahead of you, her legend keeps riding, still untamed. You are not exactly sure how you ended up in the throne room of an ancient Chinese palace, but here you are, eyes wide, ears open, and lungs filled with incense so strong it might be rewriting your DNA. The floor is polished stone, the kind of clean that only happens when an empire's worth of servants polish it daily while being terrified for their lives. Velvet curtains shift in the breeze, or maybe the tension. You are not sure, because sitting at the very center of it all, poised like she invented posture, is Wu Zetian, and she does not blink. She does not have to. Born in 624 CE, Wu is not supposed to matter. She is a second-tier concubine to the Emperor Taizong, which is roughly the imperial equivalent of background character with occasional dialogue. But Wu Zetian is not here to be part of the scenery. She is here to edit the script from the inside. Most women in her position would hope to catch the emperor's eye, maybe secure a promotion to higher-ranked arm candy. Wu catches more than eyes. She catches patterns, alliances, weaknesses. When Taizong dies, she is supposed to enter a Buddhist convent like the other concubines, neatly shelved and safely out of history's way. She goes to the convent, then she comes right back. Because when the next emperor, Gaozong, Taizong's son, takes the throne, Wu manages to get herself back into the palace, and more importantly, back into... As in, she becomes his favorite, his partner, his actual co-ruler. Yes, she is also his father's former concubine, which is strange, but this is ancient China. If history had a relationship status, it would be complicated and deeply alarming. Soon, she is Empress Consort, then de facto ruler when Gaozong suffers a series of strokes. And then, because Wu Zetian does not do halfway, she becomes Emperor. Full stop. No Empress, no Regent. She takes the male title, sits on the dragon throne, and renames the dynasty after herself. Historians lose their minds, not just because a woman is ruling China, although yes, that is a first. It is also how she does it. She builds a bureaucracy that promotes people based on merit. She expands the imperial exam system. She strengthens the civil service. She funds agriculture, supports infrastructure, and generally outgoverns half the men who came before her. And if you think she does all that by smiling sweetly and handing out tea, no, Wu plays palace politics like a grandmaster playing speed chess with knives. Her enemies mysteriously die. Her rivals confess to wild crimes just before they vanish. There is a whole department of secret police, and it is not just for decoration. Some historians say she ran a surveillance state centuries before modern intelligence agencies thought of it. Was she ruthless? Yes. Is that surprising? No. You try being a woman in 7th century China and surviving a week at court without resorting to the occasional strategic exile. Her critics accuse her of poisoning people, of witchcraft, of plotting her way through a sea of blood. Her defenders say she just played the same game men played, but better, and with better hair. Historians still argue whether she was a reformer, a despot, a feminist icon, or a terrifying genius with a to-do list written in blood and calligraphy. She is probably all of the above. You walk with her through the palace gardens. The air smells like sandalwood and suspicion. Cherry blossoms fall with weaponized grace. Wu points to a distant pavilion and names the stars above it. She funds astronomy, poetry, architecture, Buddhism. She is one of the great cultural patrons of the Tang dynasty. The world beyond the palace changes under her rule. Roads are repaired, borders expand, farmers receive tax breaks, the poor receive grain. And yet, her reign is not all serenity and moonlight. She climbs to the top through betrayals, silences dissent through force, and may or may not have had a few family members retired in the dead of night. There are rumors of babies killed, rivals crushed, and ministers who slipped while standing completely still. No one is neutral about Wu Zetian. They either fear her, praise her, or study her from a safe distance. A quirky little side note. She loved words, truly loved them. She even invented her own Chinese characters, unique, ornate symbols used in official documents. They were so specific they fell out of use after her death. That is legacy. You know you have arrived when your handwriting gets banned by future governments. Her court is full of poets, philosophers, mathematicians, and people who say things like, "Yes, Your Majesty, of course," at suspiciously well-timed intervals. She surrounds herself with brilliant minds and terrifying loyalty, and when that loyalty falters, well, let us just say no one ever forgets the sound of footsteps in the corridor after midnight. Toward the end of her reign, things begin to crack. She grows older, weaker. The Zhang brothers, young, attractive courtiers with allegedly very attentive personalities, rise in favor. Some historians call them lovers, others call them distractions. Either way, they do not last. By now, the court is divided. Ministers whisper behind sleeves. Some want her gone, others just want to survive the week. Eventually, the pressure mounts. Wu abdicates the throne in favor of her son, peacefully, strategically, and surrounded by layers of guards, just in case someone gets any funny ideas. She dies soon after, at the age of 81, which for someone who ruled through palace coups and probably high blood pressure is a miracle. Now here is where it gets strange. On her tombstone, carved into stone, surrounded by lions, guarded by cliffs, there are no words, just a blank slab, no titles, no dates, no imperial poetry, just silence. Interpret that however you wish. Maybe she was being humble. Maybe she wanted her deeds to speak for themselves. Maybe she knew that no sentence, no matter how poetic, could contain her. And yet here you are, still thinking about her. Which means she won. You were not supposed to remember Wu Zetian. Not really. Later dynasties tried to erase her, slander her, reduce her to caricature. But you are here. She is here. The throne room still echoes with her footsteps. You imagine sitting beside her as the scrolls are unrolled. Each one is a decision, a law, a command that changes lives. She reads them with eyes that have seen too much, and hands that are too steady for someone who once watched an empire turn to dust and built it again, better. She does not speak. She does not need to. She has ruled. She has rewritten the rules. And somewhere, in the quiet that follows empires, her name lingers, not whispered, not shouted, just present, like stone, like power, like Wu. You are not prepared for the smell at all. That is the first thing. It hits you in the face like an aristocrat's glove in a duel. Sharp, sweet, earthy, and wrong in all directions. You are standing in the middle of a 16th century French palace, surrounded by velvet, incense, and something that definitely smells like murder. Welcome to the court of Catherine de Medici, Queen of France, Mother of Kings, and the closest thing Europe ever got to an actual poison ivy plant with a crown. She is not what you expect. Small, quiet, elegant. She blends into tapestries. Her smile is polite. Her hands are gloved, always gloved. Which, you will soon realize, is not just a fashion choice. It is damage control. Catherine is born in Florence in 1519, straight into one of the most powerful, complicated, and suspicious families in history, the Medicis. These people did not just fund the Renaissance, they invented how to look fabulous while threatening people with velvet-covered daggers. Her childhood? Not great. Her parents die, her relatives fight over her. At one point, she is held hostage in a convent during a siege. Classic princess material with added trauma and no therapy. Eventually, she marries Henry, the second son of the King of France. She is 14. He is more interested in his mistress. Diane de Poitiers is twice Catherine's age, 10 times more glamorous, and approximately 400% more in control of the marriage than Catherine ever gets to be. But Catherine? Catherine watches. She smiles. And she waits. Because Henry is not supposed to be king. But then his older brother dies in a tennis accident. Yes, really. And suddenly Henry and Catherine are King and Queen of France, except Henry still prefers Diane. So Catherine, still sidelined, begins doing what any underappreciated queen would do. She plans. Quietly. Elegantly. Like someone preparing a dinner party with live scorpions as place cards. She focuses on what she can control. Her children. She produces 10 of them. 7 survive. 3 will become kings. That is not a family, that is a franchise. And when Henry dies unexpectedly from a jousting injury involving a splinter to the eye, medieval life is wild, Catherine finally takes center stage. Because her sons, they are either too young, too sickly, or too indecisive to rule on their own. So Catherine steps in as regent, and suddenly she is running France, while pretending she is just helping out. The country is a mess. The Protestants and Catholics are at each other's throats. Nobles are constantly plotting things. People are burning things. Catherine decides to fix this with a combination of weddings, alliances, and something that historians still cannot decide was a political miscalculation or a cold-blooded masterstroke. Let us talk about the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. It is 1572. Catherine has just married her Catholic daughter to the Protestant King of Navarre. A bold move meant to bring unity. The Protestant nobles gather in Paris for the wedding. There is tension, but everyone is smiling through gritted teeth. Then suddenly, in the middle of the night, someone yells, "Kill the Protestants!" and Paris erupts into 6 days of horror. Thousands are murdered, the Seine runs red, and Catherine? She says very little. Some historians claim she ordered it, others think she merely allowed it. Some argue she was swept up in a situation she no longer controlled. What is clear is that Catherine walks away from that week without a single hair out of place. France will never be the same, and neither will her reputation. From then on, she is the Black Queen, a sorceress, a poisoner, a spider in pearls. And yes, she is fascinated by poisons, not necessarily to use them, but to understand them. Her apothecary lab is legendary. Herbs, powders, vials, perfumes that could heal or kill depending on the dosage. She surrounds herself with astrologers, scientists, mystics. Nostradamus is on speed dial. Her court is a swirl of science and superstition, with Catherine standing calmly at the center. A quirky fact? She is obsessed with Italian cuisine. She brings forks to France. Before that, people just stabbed food with knives or their fingers. Catherine introduces artichokes, spinach, sorbet. She does not just rule, she invents the menu. She also builds the Tuileries Palace, gardens, libraries. She collects books, funds art, and manages to keep the French monarchy from imploding every time one of her sons sneezes dramatically and threatens to abdicate. Let us talk about those sons. Francis II, married to Mary, Queen of Scots, reigns for a year and dies. Charles IX, troubled, paranoid, responsible for the massacre, dies young and miserable. Henry III, last of her boys, is flamboyant, indecisive, and unpopular. Catherine spends most of her final years trying to stop him from getting murdered. It does not work. But the fact that France holds together at all during this chaos, that is Catherine. She is not beloved, but she is respected. No one crosses her lightly. No one ignores her. She writes thousands of letters. She arranges treaties. She bribes, negotiates, and terrifies ambassadors. She survives more than 4 decades at the heart of a court where people die over dinner. She dies in 1589, heart-failing, tired, and surrounded by enemies who are far too polite to celebrate in public. Her funeral barely happens, because as they are wheeling her body through the streets, Henry III gets assassinated. No one has time to mourn her. The throne is in crisis. Again, Catherine is buried quietly. No grand spectacle, no golden statues, just silence. History sweeps past her like she was never there. Except she was. Every portrait of her shows a woman in black, thin, sharp, eyes like twin razors. But behind that there is someone else, a survivor, a mother who kept a collapsing monarchy duct-taped together for decades, a foreign girl no one wanted who became the most powerful woman in France, and possibly the most misunderstood. You stand in her old apothecary now. The jars are dusty, the labels faded. Somewhere, deep in the back, there is a drawer labelled for future queens. Inside is just a mirror, no poison, just the truth. Catherine knew the cost of power. She paid it in reputation, in loneliness, in blood. But she never flinched, not once. She ruled. And in the end, that is what history cannot digest, that she did it all in velvet gloves, with a soft voice, and a mind so sharp it could cut through the chaos like a knife through a poisoned peach. You look at her legacy now, not as a villain, not as a saint, but as a woman who understood what the throne demanded, and gave it exactly that, no more, no less. You are standing in a clearing in what used to be a Portuguese camp, and the silence here is thick. It is not a peaceful silence. It is the kind of silence that tastes like tension and legacy. There are no chairs here, except the one being made, right now, by a man kneeling on all fours, spine straight, palms pressed into the dirt. And seated on him like it is the most normal throne in the world is Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba. No one speaks, no one moves. Everyone just stares because what you are witnessing is not just a meeting, it is a declaration. The year is 1622, the place is what is now Angola. The Portuguese have come with smug colonial energy and a list of demands. Nzinga has come with silk robes, a diplomatic poker face, and zero intention of playing by anyone else's rules. When the Portuguese fail to provide her with a seat, expecting her to kneel, she invents one, out of a human spine. Message received. And then she smiles. Now let us rewind, because this moment, this back chair moment, does not just happen out of nowhere. Nzinga is born in 1583 into the royal family of the Kingdom of Ndongo, daughter of a king who is busy trying to stop Portuguese slavers from tearing apart his land. Her name means to twist because she is born with the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck, an ominous omen to some, a prophecy to others. It turns out it was foreshadowing. She will twist fate, strategy, and enemies into knots for the next 80 years. She grows up surrounded by war, politics, and constant betrayal. Her father trains her not like a princess, but like an heir. She learns to read, to fight, to negotiate, to lead. She is fluent in diplomacy before she even hits puberty. She can hold a spear and a political grudge with equal precision. Her brother becomes king after their father dies, but let us just say, he is not exactly Team Nzinga. He kills her son. He exiles her. He sees her as a threat, which, to be fair, she absolutely is. But when the Portuguese start closing in, spreading outposts, demanding slaves, claiming land like they invented the continent, guess who gets sent in to fix it? Nzinga. She walks into that first diplomatic meeting like a storm in silk. She is not yet queen, not officially. But that does not matter. She speaks flawless Portuguese. She negotiates with poise, and she leaves with more concessions than anyone thought possible. Historians still argue whether she intimidated the governor into submission or simply outclassed him so thoroughly he surrendered from embarrassment. You follow her out of the room. She does not celebrate. She is already thinking 10 steps ahead. Then her brother dies. Possibly by suicide, possibly by poison. No one is entirely sure. What we do know is that Nzinga does not hesitate. She takes the throne. Now here is where the story splits between fact, folklore, and sheer power. Some say she kills her nephew to prevent a rival claim. Others say she adopts him. Some say she feeds traitors to crocodiles. Some say she keeps a harem of young men dressed as women whom she sleeps with and occasionally executes at breakfast if they displease her. Are any of these true? Maybe. Maybe not. Nzinga never bothers to correct the rumors, because why would she? Fear is a weapon. Reputation is armor. If people believe you are capable of anything, they treat you accordingly. She is now queen of not just Ndongo, but eventually Matamba too. She builds her own kingdom in the mountains, a kingdom of resistance. When the Portuguese press in, she vanishes into the highlands and sets up a base so fortified it makes European generals cry into their maps. Guerrilla warfare? She writes the manual, Psychological Warfare. She annotates it, and she does not fight alone. Nzinga builds coalitions like other people build dinner parties. She allies with the Dutch when they invade, then with rebellious African tribes, then with anyone else who hates the Portuguese even slightly. One week she is sending envoys to Amsterdam. The next, she is ambushing a slave fort in the jungle. And always, always, she is watching, adjusting, outlasting. You follow her into the forest now. Her soldiers move like smoke. You notice something strange. They are not just men. Women fight in her army too. Nzinga trains them herself. Teaches them to ride, to aim, to hold a line. She knows that freedom does not come in one shape. She makes space for it. A quirky detail. She adopts Christian imagery when it suits her. She gets baptized, changes her name to Ana de Souza, carries a crucifix. But she also continues practicing traditional rituals, consulting oracles, invoking ancestral spirits, and refusing to be boxed in by a single doctrine. Her faith is not confusion, it is strategy. She weaponizes appearance. In one legend, she stages a fake funeral to convince the Portuguese she has died. They lower their guard, she attacks, classic Nzinga. Other stories say she would meet with ambassadors surrounded by leopards and boa constrictors, just to keep things lively. But beneath the stories, the tactics, the style, there is something simpler. A mission. Nzinga will not let her people be ruled. She will not let her kingdom be broken. She will not kneel to empire. Even when Portugal sends wave after wave of troops, even when she is forced into retreat, even when the slave trade rages around her, she keeps going. You are now in her war camp in the late 1650s. She is in her 70s. Most people that age are picking out rocking chairs. Nzinga is still drafting battle plans. She meets foreign envoys with the energy of someone 30 years younger. The Portuguese are exhausted, their governors come and go, Nzinga stays. Eventually, she negotiates peace, not because she is defeated, but because she has outlasted everyone. The treaty she signs preserves her rule, her kingdom, her dignity. She dies in 1663 at the age of 80 in her palace on her terms. Portugal takes over later, but only after her death. No one conquers her in life. Today, statues of Nzinga stand in Angola. She is remembered as a national hero, a symbol of resistance, a warrior queen who would rather build her own empire than beg for mercy in someone else's. In the capital, Luanda, there is a boulevard named after her. Her face is on currency, her name is taught in schools, and yet, outside of Africa, she is still too often left out of the storybooks. Too loud, too complicated, too defiant. But not tonight. Tonight, you are sitting beside a queen who once turned a man into a chair rather than accept inferiority. You feel the heat of the fire, you hear the distant sound of marching, you smell gunpowder, herbs, smoke. Nzinga's eyes are fixed on the horizon. She does not look tired, she looks inevitable. And as you breathe in the night air, heavy with history, you realize something. Some queens wear crowns. Nzinga was the crown. You are in a room so full of velvet and expectation that even the air feels like it has been trained in etiquette. The candles are tall, the silence is expensive, and every breath you take feels like it might be taxed. Welcome to the court of Queen Elizabeth II, where every glance is diplomacy, every smile is strategy, and every wrong move is a rehearsal for your own funeral. You stand to one side, hands politely clasped, and then you see her. Not walking, gliding. Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen. The woman who turned being unmarried into an international power move and converted political loneliness into statecraft. She is not young anymore, but you cannot tell if it matters. Her dress weighs more than your moral compass. Her face is a porcelain battlefield of white lead makeup and carefully calculated emotion. And her eyes, those eyes, could sign your execution or your promotion, and you would not know which until the morning. She was never supposed to be queen, not really. Born in 1533, Elizabeth is the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, whose marriage required an entire religious reformation, 2 excommunications, and a plot twist involving Thomas More. Anne is executed when Elizabeth is just 2. Henry moves on as he tends to do. Elizabeth is declared illegitimate, her future grim. But she does not flinch. She studies languages, theology, history, and rhetoric, with the kind of focus usually reserved for revolutionaries and chess grandmasters. By 10, she can write better Latin than most priests. By 12, she is translating Cicero for fun. She learns to sit still, she learns to say little, and she watches everyone, especially the people who underestimate her. As a teenager, she is almost executed for treason. Not because she did anything wrong, but because her half-sister, Queen Mary Thaffi, is paranoid and very into bonfires, especially if Protestants are involved. Elizabeth survives imprisonment in the Tower, just barely. She emerges blinking into sunlight, alive but quieter. And then Mary dies. Just like that, Elizabeth inherits the throne, a broken country, a battered crown, a kingdom half Catholic, half Protestant, all exhausted. She is 25, unmarried, surrounded by suspicious men with swords and secrets. The odds? Not great. But then she opens her mouth. Her coronation speech is a masterclass in calculated reassurance. She promises stability. She invokes divine will. She sidesteps the whole illegitimate daughter of a beheaded woman thing with the grace of someone who has lived inside scandal her entire life. And from that moment on, she rules like a woman who knows the price of every compliment. Everyone tells her to marry everyone, council members, foreign dignitaries, ambassadors who smell like sea voyages and misplaced confidence. Marriage is stability, marriage is security, marriage is what queens are supposed to do. Elizabeth nods, smiles, says she is thinking about it, and then never does. Historians still argue about whether she was actually celibate. Some think she was in love with Robert Dudley, her lifelong favourite. Others whisper about court scandals and private trysts. Elizabeth never confirms anything, because mystery is its own form of power. She calls herself married to England, and honestly, it is the healthiest political relationship in Tudor history. Her reign becomes a balancing act so intricate it makes tightrope walking look like toddler gymnastics. Catholic plots, she survives them. Spanish threats, she faces them. Parliament grumbles, she dissolves it. Rebellions, she crushes them with polite speeches. And the occasional army, She surrounds herself with men she can control, or at least outmaneuver. William Cecil, her chief advisor, whose paperwork probably weighed more than he did. Francis Walsingham, her spy master, who built a web of surveillance that reached into every noble house in Europe. Sir Walter Raleigh, who named a whole colony after her, then got imprisoned for falling in love with someone who was not her. Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, who tried to rebel against her and got dramatically executed for it. Lesson: do not rebel against someone who signs death warrants in flawless penmanship. And of course, Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's cousin, her rival, and eventually her problem. Mary, the glamorous Catholic who flees Scotland and ends up in English custody for nearly 20 years. Mary, who plots and schemes and dreams of Elizabeth's crown. Elizabeth waits, watches, and finally signs Mary's death warrant in 1587. It is not easy, but it is necessary. Because Elizabeth knows something Mary never learned. Being a queen is not about love, it is about survival. And speaking of survival, let's talk about the Spanish Armada. In 1588, Philip II of Spain sends a fleet so massive that it creates its own legends. 130 ships, thousands of soldiers. The aim? Invade England. Depose Elizabeth. Restore Catholic rule. England panics, prays, builds fires along the coast. Elizabeth, meanwhile, puts on armor. She rides out to address her troops at Tilbury. Stands tall, declares she has the body of a weak and feeble woman, but the heart and stomach of a king. The soldiers cheer. The storm rolls in. The Armada scatters. England is saved. Not just by wind or tactics, but by the fact that Elizabeth never once blinked. You walk beside her in her garden now. The roses are carefully arranged like foreign policy. The air smells of lavender, politics, and powdered wigs. Elizabeth is older, her teeth ache, her wig is heavier, her courtiers walk slower now, waiting for her approval with breaths held tight. A quirky detail? She collects over 2,000 gowns. Her wardrobe is both armor and theatre. She paints her face with white lead to cover the scars of smallpox until the makeup itself becomes a symbol. She is not trying to look human. She is trying to look eternal. Another detail? She writes poetry. Personal, sharp, reflective, her verses reveal cracks in the marble, loneliness, frustration, the crushing pressure of being seen but never touched. One poem, written near the end of her life, reads like a goodbye she never gave out loud. And yet, she holds on. She watches Shakespeare's plays in court. She reads new translations of the classics. She debates law and foreign policy and whether anyone will ever truly understand her. And eventually, the end comes. In 1603, she falls into what her advisors call melancholy. She will not lie down, will not speak, will not name a successor until the last possible moment. She stands in a room lit by dying candles, dressed in black, refusing to sleep. She dies upright, or so the story goes. She ruled for 44 years. No husband, no children, just her and the weight of England. When she is buried in Westminster Abbey, they put her in the same tomb as Mary Ferbubi, her half-sister, her tormentor, her predecessor. The inscription reads, "Partners in throne and grave," which is poetic, if not entirely accurate. Elizabeth was not anyone's partner. She was the center of her own legend, the woman who turned vulnerability into strength, the queen who built an image so strong it held a country together. And even now, centuries later, you feel her presence in every female monarch who dares to speak with certainty, in every leader who knows that power does not come from having the right name, but from surviving the wrong ones. You leave her garden slowly, footsteps muffled by grass. Behind you, Elizabeth turns slightly, just enough to remind you she saw everything, and she still does. You are marching now. The ground under your boots crunches with a mixture of frost and shattered promises. The air smells like wood smoke, wet stone, and the end of an era. Ahead of you, her cloak is the color of conquests, deep red, embroidered with gold thread, heavy enough to anchor a cathedral bell. You are following Isabella of Castile, the queen who unified Spain, tamed unruly nobles, sponsored a certain navigator named Columbus, and still found time to invent modern tax paperwork. She does not ride like royalty. She rides like an army general with good posture, and she does not glance behind her to check if you are keeping up. Of course you are, everyone does, or they vanish. Born in 1451 into a kingdom on fire, Isabella was not expected to rule. She was third in line with all the usual problems: a volatile king, conniving nobles, and a family tree full of people allergic to succession plans. Castile at the time is not some unified, sunny paradise. It is a mess of factions, debt, and cities that burn faster than agreements are signed. By 17, Isabella has had enough. She refuses to be married off without her consent, a radical stance at a time when royal daughters were basically barter chips with good hair. When her half-brother dies and a messy war of succession breaks out, Isabella ends up crowned Queen of Castile in 1474, not with smooth fanfare, but with urgent ceremony and a ton of swords in the background. And then she really begins. First, she marries Ferdinand of Aragon, not for romance, for geometry. His land connects to hers. Together they stitch Castile and Aragon into something that begins to resemble Spain. They call themselves the Catholic monarchs, which is not just a religious brand. It is a marketing campaign backed by an inquisition and the best spy network that Catholicism can buy. They are not co-rulers, not really. Isabella rules Castile. Ferdinand rules Aragon. Their signatures appear side by side, but their decisions do not always match. She is the brains, he is the cavalry, and together they launch one of the most aggressive nation-building projects in history. But first, Granada. At the time, the south of Spain is ruled by the Muslim Nasrid dynasty. It has been that way for over 700 years. But Isabella wants the Reconquista, the Christian reconquest of Spain, finished, officially, militarily, publicly. So she funds an army. Ferdinand leads the charge, but Isabella manages the logistics. She organizes supply lines, she writes letters that make nobles cry, she personally oversees troop morale, she turns her court into a mobile headquarters. And after 10 years of siege, deals, betrayal, and very awkward dinner invitations, Granada falls in 1492. You stand with her as she watches the Muslim emir Boabdil hand over the keys to the city. He weeps. Isabella does not, because this is more than victory, this is nationhood, but she is not finished. In that same year, she agrees to fund a voyage by a Genoese navigator with questionable math skills and an absolutely unstoppable confidence, Christopher Columbus. Historians still debate why she agreed. Perhaps she believed in his vision. Perhaps she wanted to beat Portugal to new trade routes. Perhaps she simply had a good gut feeling. Either way, she pawns some of her jewelry, signs the papers, and off Columbus goes, straight into accidental infamy. Later, when the reports come back of islands, gold, conversions, Isabella claims the credit. The New World becomes part of the Spanish crown, and colonialism is born in all its violent, glittering, bloody complexity. You walk through her court now. The ceilings are carved, the floors echo, the clerks are tired, because Isabella is not just conquering lands, she is creating systems. She builds a professional bureaucracy, a standing army. She overhauls tax collection. She brings order to chaos with a pen sharper than most swords. a quirky detail. She was obsessed with cleanliness, bathed regularly, which, for 15th century royalty, is the equivalent of owning a spaceship. She also rode in armor while pregnant and dictated state documents while giving birth. Multitasking? No, megatasking. But her reign is not without cruelty. In 1492, she signs the Alhambra Decree, expelling all Jews from Spain unless they convert to Christianity. Roughly 200,000 people are forced to leave or renounce their faith. Synagogues are destroyed. Families scatter. A culture that had flourished for centuries is erased almost overnight. This is not some reluctant compromise. Isabella believes it is necessary for national unity. She and Ferdinand also begin supporting the Spanish Inquisition, which begins as a tool for rooting out fake conversions and turns into one of history's most infamous instruments of torture and fear. Isabella's piety is not soft, it is iron-wrapped and non-negotiable, and yet in a strange, conflicting twist, she also improves education. She supports universities. She argues for the rights of indigenous peoples, on paper at least, even as her ships carry colonizers and soldiers across the Atlantic. She sends missionaries, but not always muskets. Her views are complex, contradictory, deeply human and deeply flawed. You visit her library, it smells like vellum and ink. She has books in Latin, Arabic, Hebrew. She reads everything, writes letters daily, sleeps very little. Her hair is going grey, but her mind sharpens. She gives birth to 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. She tries to arrange brilliant marriages, political unions that will extend Spain's influence across Europe. But tragedy follows her like a shadow. Her son, Juan, dies young. Her daughter, Isabella, Queen of Portugal, dies in childbirth. Another daughter, Juana, later known as Juana la Loca, is brilliant but unstable, eventually locked away in a convent. Her daughter, Catherine of Aragon, is shipped off to England, marries Henry VIII, and you know how that ends. By the time Isabella is in her late 50s, her body is failing. She writes her will carefully, precisely. She names Juana and her husband Philip the Handsome as heirs, though she is already nervous about how Philip will rule. She dies in 1504. Her funeral is grand, but quiet. According to her will, she is buried in a simple tomb in Granada, the city she conquered, not Madrid, not Castile, Granada, as if to remind Spain of where it came from and what it cost to become whole. Today, people remember her as a saint, a tyrant, a unifier, a colonizer, a reformer, a fanatic, a feminist, a monarch. All of them are true. You walk through the ruins of the Alhambra. The arches whisper of empires lost. The shadows speak of policy and pain. And in the center of it all, you imagine Isabella, not smiling, not triumphant, just thinking. She is still thinking. You are cold, but not decorative winter festival cold, not let us light candles and wear mittens cold. No, this is the kind of cold that swallows the color from your skin and replaces it with aching. It is December in Oxford. It is the middle of the night, and you are trudging through half-frozen mud beside a woman in a snow-colored cloak who is trying to reclaim her birthright while wearing clothes that could double as camouflage or funeral attire. Her name is Matilda, but she prefers Empress. You know better than to use the wrong one. The only sound is the soft crunch of boots in frost and the occasional hiss of breath. You are dressed in white. Everyone is. It is the only way to blend into the snowy hills. You are slipping between enemy lines, not metaphorically, literally. Stephen the usurper has laid siege to the city. The castle you just left is starving. The walls will not hold. But Matilda? She will not be caught. Let us backtrack. Matilda is born in 1102 to King Henry I of England and Matilda of Scotland, a woman known for her piety, her quiet strength, and her name repetition. Henry is a strong king, brutal when he needs to be. But what he is not, unfortunately, is lucky with sons. His only legitimate male heir, William Adelin, drowns in 1120 when the White Ship sinks in the English Channel. It is a tragedy. A preventable wine-fueled party boat disaster tragedy, over 300 nobles dead, and with them the English succession. You might think Henry would panic. He does not. He looks at his remaining child, his daughter, and thinks, fine, she will do. Now this is a big deal. No woman had ever been crowned king or queen regnant of England before. Queens, yes, but only as consorts, side characters, background wives with good embroidery skills. A reigning queen, that was uncharted political terrain. Matilda is not just royal, she is imperial. She is married at 12 to Henry V, the Holy Roman Emperor, and spends years in a world of coronations, campaigns, and court intrigue that makes England look like a backyard puppet show. She becomes Empress of the Holy Roman Empire, not in a pretend title way, in a crown on head, ruling regions kind of way. But then he dies, and she comes home. King Henry demands the nobles of England swear allegiance to her. And they do, sort of, through gritted teeth. Because here is the thing. Many of them do not really mean it. She is still a woman, and this is still medieval England. Then Henry dies in 1135, and that is when the knives come out. Instead of crowning Matilda, the barons support Stephen of Blois, Henry's nephew. He is the son of William the Conqueror's daughter, a safe, male, agreeable choice, bland but useful. Think cardboard in chainmail. They crown him king within days. No waiting around, no confirmation, no courtesy call to Matilda. It is theft, plain and simple. And Matilda does not take theft lightly. She begins her campaign slowly, carefully. First from Normandy, where she remarries, this time to Geoffrey of Anjou, a man so controversial, the English nickname his supporters the Angevins, and instantly begin hating them. Geoffrey is fiery, ambitious, and 12 years younger than she is. It is less romance and more territorial calculus. Still, they have children. One of them will be Henry, the future king, but we shall get to him later. At first, Matilda stays back, but once her base of support grows strong enough, she crosses into England in 1139 and everything begins to fracture. Thus starts what later chroniclers will refer to, quite literally, as the Anarchy. Yes, that is the official name. Not the War of Matilda or the Stephen succession, just the Anarchy, because no one knows what is going on. Allegiances flip like coins. Every castle is a question mark. Roads become dangerous, priests get robbed. Entire counties change sides between lunch and supper. Matilda captures Stephen at the Battle of Lincoln in 1141. It is huge, a turning point. For one shimmering moment, it looks like she will take the throne. The Archbishop of Canterbury prepares for her coronation. London opens its gates. And then she says exactly what she thinks. She does not flatter, she does not coo. She walks into the capital like a woman who has seen empires rise and fall, and assumes everyone is intelligent enough to simply accept her victory. Big mistake. London turns on her within weeks. The crowd that cheered her arrival now pelts her with garbage. She flees. Again, all that ground lost. It is her one fatal political flaw. She expects the respect she earned instead of performing the humility that greases medieval gears. Still, she does not stop. Her half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, remains her most loyal general. Her uncle, King David of Scotland, supports her claim. The Count of Anjou holds Normandy, but it is not enough. She keeps fighting, retreating, regrouping. The war drags on, her hair begins to grey. And then comes that moment in Oxford Castle. You are back in the snow now. She is in white. Her men are in white. They walk, single file, across the frozen Thames past Stephen's guards. The wind howls, but not one voice dares cry out. They escape. She escapes. Again. And yet, she never becomes queen, never crowned, never anointed, never formally recognized. Stephen reclaims power. Her supporters dwindle. Robert of Gloucester dies. One by one, the fires burn out. So she leaves. She returns to Normandy. She becomes administrator, advisor, mentor. She shapes her son, Henry, into a ruler. She does not just teach him statecraft, she teaches him war, patience, the art of surviving betrayal. And when Stephen's only son, Eustace, dies suddenly, the game resets. The barons are tired, the treasury is empty, and in a rare act of common sense, Stephen agrees to name Henry as his heir in exchange for peace. The civil war ends. In 1154, Henry becomes king. Henry II, founder of the Plantagenet dynasty. One of England's most powerful monarchs, husband of Eleanor of Aquitaine, father of Richard the Lionheart and King John. And none of it would have happened without Matilda. She dies in 1167, buried in Rouen, her tomb inscribed with a phrase that captures the entire impossible, defiant truth of her life. Great by birth, greater by marriage, greatest in her offspring. A quirky detail? Matilda uses her imperial seal, her old Holy Roman Empress seal, for most of her English correspondence. Even during wartime, even when the empire is distant memory, she refuses to be less than what she had been. It is not nostalgia, it is strategy. No one forgets who she is, ever. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue over whether Matilda could have ruled if she had just softened her image, played the docile queen instead of the commanding empress. Was it her pride that doomed her, or the deep misogyny of her time? You suspect the answer is both. Tonight, she is often overshadowed. Her son is remembered. Her grandsons are remembered. Her legacy is long, but she herself, faded, footnoted, but not by you. You see her clearly, the mud on her hem, the silence in her march, the fire that refused to die. She may not have worn the crown, but she carved the throne. You are standing on dry, red earth, under a sky that feels like it has not blinked in hours. The wind here does not cool you. It tastes like dust, smoke, and the kind of fury that makes metal melt. You hear hoofbeats in the distance, not just one or two, but a chorus. And at the center of it, riding full force with a child strapped to her back and a sword drawn high, is Rani Lakshmibai, the Queen of Jhansi. You forget to breathe. Because this is not a royal procession. This is war. It is 1857 and India is burning. Lakshmibai's face is calm, but it is not soft. It is the calm of someone who has counted every exit, anticipated every betrayal, and is prepared to die exactly on her own terms. She does not scream, she does not pose, she charges. But let us go back to the beginning, back to when she was still Manikarnika, nicknamed Manu. She is born in 1828 in Varanasi, one of India's holiest cities. Her family is Marathi Brahmin, but not aristocratic. Her father works for the local court, and when her mother dies, she is raised in a house full of scrolls, swords, and a very progressive definition of ladylike. Manikarnika is not sent to embroidery class. She is sent to the stables. She learns Sanskrit, horseback riding, martial arts, archery. She practices with swords taller than she is. Her best friends are boys. Her teachers are astonished. Her enemies do not know her yet, but they will. At 14, she marries the much older Raja Gangadhar Rao, the ruler of Jhansi. The palace welcomes her politely with folded hands and lots of muttering. She becomes Lakshmibai, takes to courtly life with efficiency, and quickly becomes her husband's closest advisor. They are happy for a while. But tragedy circles like a vulture. Their only biological son dies in infancy. The Raja, already ill, adopts a young relative as heir and petitions the British East India Company to honour the boy's inheritance. The paperwork is sound, the traditions are clear, but the British have a policy now, one designed to make principled paperwork conveniently irrelevant. It is called the Doctrine of Lapse, and it says that if a princely ruler dies without a biological son, the territory lapses back to the company. Jhansi, in other words, is up for grabs. Lakshmibai protests. She appeals. She points to past legal agreements. She dresses impeccably and argues forcefully. The British sip their tea and say no. She says, famously, "Meri Jhansi nahi dungi." I shall not give up my Jhansi. They think she's bluffing. She is not. The British annex Jhansi anyway. They send a political officer. He expects a smooth transition. He gets several months of suspicious silence and the slow clinking of swords being sharpened behind palace curtains. Then comes 1857, a flashpoint, a powder keg, a fuse lit by disrespect. Indian soldiers, sepoys, rise against their British officers in Meerut. What begins as a mutiny becomes a full-blown rebellion. Cities ignite, barracks fall, armories are looted, and across the subcontinent the question spreads faster than telegrams. Whose side are you on? Lakshmibai tries diplomacy at first. She maintains order in Jhansi. She keeps the palace open, sends careful letters to the British, assuring them of peace. But she knows what is coming, and when it comes, it is not subtle. British troops march toward Jhansi. Rumours say the Queen is harbouring rebels, that she is plotting a rebellion of her own. She denies it until there is nothing left to deny. The British lay siege to Jhansi. You are there as cannonballs slam into the outer walls. You hear the city cry out. People flee. Markets close. The temples fall silent. And from the palace steps Lakshmibai walks out, dressed in armour, carrying a sword, and looking like justice wrapped in steel. She has no military background, no official training, and yet she takes command. She rallies troops, she forms battalions, she stations women on rooftops with boiling oil, she orders ammunition forged, walls reinforced, scouts deployed. She rides through the city on horseback, giving orders like a seasoned general. She is 29 years old, a quirky detail. Her favourite horse is named Badal. The horse is trained to climb stairs. She rides it through the palace, into courtyards, onto balconies. The horse becomes a legend too, loyal, tireless, part of her silhouette. The siege lasts weeks. The British breach the walls. Lakshmibai and a handful of loyal warriors fight their way out, on horseback, carrying her son strapped to her back, galloping through the night under fire. She reaches Kalpi, where she allies with other rebel leaders, Tatya Tope, Nana Sahib, Rao Saheb. Together they form what amounts to a rebel government. They strategize, plan a counterattack. She is not just a figurehead now, she is their best commander. They retake Gwalia, a massive fort city. She rides at the front of the charge. She sleeps in armour. She oversees rations. She writes proclamations. And then in June 1858, British troops close in again. This time, she does not run. She leads her cavalry herself into open battle, sword drawn, cloak streaming. Accounts vary. Some say she was shot from behind. Others say she was injured and carried away, only to die later. Some say she asked to be cremated on the battlefield to keep the British from desecrating her body. Historians still argue over the details, but what they agree on is this. She died fighting, and she was never captured. British officers wrote about her with an odd mixture of fear and admiration. One described her as the most dangerous of all Indian leaders. Another said she had the courage of a man and the grace of a queen. You stand now where she once stood, on the walls of Gwalior Fort. The wind picks up. The city below sprawls in every direction. You hear traffic, radios, the hum of daily life. And above it all, her statue. Rani Lakshmibai on horseback, sword raised, sun behind her, not a martyr, not a victim, a warrior in full gallop. In textbooks, she is called India's Joan of Arc. But that is too small. She was not a symbol. She was a siege. You are standing in a hallway so gilded that you begin to feel mildly insulted by your own breathing. Every surface reflects candlelight. Every mirror seems to judge your posture. The air smells like powdered hair, orange blossoms, and just a hint of debt. This is Versailles, and it is both magnificent and monstrous. And at the far end of a corridor lined with luxury and gossip, she appears, Marie Antoinette, folding something that does not belong here. A paper swan, not a decree, not a fan, just a quiet, delicate shape in hands trained to wear diamonds. Let us rewind. Because before the guillotine, before the diamonds, and long before the cake she never actually mentioned, she was a girl with too many names and very little control over where she was going. Born in 1755 as Maria Antonia Josefa Johanna, she is the 15th child of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria and Emperor Francis I. Her childhood is an elaborate musical overture, harpsichords, tutors, and ceremonial gowns before breakfast. She learns French, dance, etiquette. She does not learn that someday France will demand her head for crimes committed centuries before she ever arrived. At age 14, she is selected to marry Louis Auguste, the Dauphin of France, heir to the French throne. She travels across the border. Her Austrian identity is symbolically stripped at a ceremonial transfer, her gown removed, her belongings replaced, even her name slightly altered. She is now Marie Antoinette. She is no longer Maria Antonia. She is a political symbol wrapped in tulle. Her wedding is lavish. Her welcome is cold. Louis is 15. He is quiet, awkward, deeply uninterested in public life, and absolutely fascinated with locksmithing. The court at Versailles is a brutal place for any outsider. For a foreign teenager with a thick accent and thin patience, it is a minefield. The marriage is not consummated for 7 years. 7. The court gossips. Satirical pamphlets known as libelles circulate, depicting Marie as frigid, adulterous, manipulative, often all three at once. None of them bother with evidence, none of them need to. Truth is quite irrelevant. Perception is policy. So she builds a nice bubble. She decorates Petit Trianon, a private residence on the palace grounds. She fills it with close friends, quiet music, and activities that do not require being stared at by 300 nobles before breakfast. She dresses more simply there. She laughs, she breathes, she pretends she is not wearing a mask. Outside the bubble, people starve. France is crumbling under the weight of its own privilege. The 7 Years' War has drained the treasury. The American Revolution has emptied what is left. The tax burden falls on the poor, while the nobility keep dancing. The Third Estate, representing commoners, is angry. And the Queen, foreign, glamorous, inaccessible, becomes the lightning rod. The people name her Madame Deficit. They say she throws masquerades while Paris starves, that she wears gowns more expensive than the National Grain Reserve, that she builds fake farms where she can pretend to be a peasant, and yes, she does have a model village, complete with sheep. It is called the Hameau de la Reine, and it is equal parts charming and deeply out of touch. Historians still debate whether it was an innocent escapist fantasy or a tone-deaf insult to the peasantry. Either way, it does not age well. And then there is the quote, "Let them eat cake." She never said it. The phrase predates her birth. It likely originated from a satirical tale about an unnamed princess. But once it sticks to Marie, it sticks forever, because it fits the story that people want to tell, that of a queen who is oblivious, selfish, cruel. The truth? She never wanted to be a queen, but in 1774, Louis XV dies. Louis Auguste becomes Louis XVI. Marie becomes queen. She is 18. She attempts to fulfill her role. She bears 4 children, 2 of whom survive infancy. She becomes more involved in politics, reluctantly. She advises her husband. She urges him to resist reforms she sees as dangerous. She is wrong, but she is trying. Then in 1789, the ground cracks open. The French Revolution begins. The Estates General is called. The Bastille falls. Paris boils over. And Versailles is no longer a palace. It is a target. The royal family is forced to relocate to Tuileries Palace in Paris. It is less opulent, less safe. The crowds are louder here. The distance between royalty and reality has closed. Marie's role now is not to rule. It is to survive. In 1791, she and Louis attempt an escape. They disguise themselves as commoners and flee toward the Austrian border. They are caught in the town of Varennes, recognized by a postmaster who probably did not know his name would end up in history books. The escape attempt destroys what little sympathy remains. From now on, Marie Antoinette is not a queen. She is an enemy of the people. A quirky detail. In prison, she continues folding paper swans and flowers. It is not vanity, it is not art, it is distraction. Something to do with her hands while waiting for a verdict everyone already knows. Her husband is tried and executed in January 1793. 9 months later, it is her turn. She is placed in conciergerie, the grim, silent holding cell for those awaiting death. Her once sumptuous gowns are replaced with coarse linen. Her hair is cut. Her children are taken away. Her son, Louis Charles, is isolated, abused, and later dies of disease. Her daughter is the only one who survives. Marie's trial is a farce. She is accused of sexual abuse against her son, a charge so grotesque even her enemies pause. Her response is simple. Nature refuses to answer such a charge made to a mother. But the verdict is decided before she enters the room. On October 16, 1793, at 12:15 p.m., she is executed. She is 37. She rides to the guillotine in an open cart, exposed to crowds that once fought to see her in a ballroom. Her last words, "Pardon me, sir, I did not mean to," uttered after stepping on the executioner's foot. You are not in Versailles now. You are standing by the Seine, near where the scaffold once stood. The noise of the city fades. You close your eyes and picture her not in silk, not in chains, but holding a paper swan in trembling fingers. She was not a hero. She was not innocent. But she was human. And sometimes history forgets that. You are standing on a stone path in the middle of a royal courtyard, surrounded by chrysanthemums and the soft rustle of bamboo. The wind does not blow here, it glides. The sky is beginning to darken into that deep violet that promises stars. And you are not alone. At the far end of the garden, perfectly still, stands a woman in robes the color of moonlight on ink. She is watching the sky, not wistfully, not idly, but as if it has said something only she understands. This is Queen Siondeok of Silla, and she is listening to the heavens because they are the only thing that has never tried to lie to her. It is the year 632, and this is Silla, one of the 3 kingdoms that make up the Korean peninsula. The other 2, Baekje and Goguryeo, are sharpening their swords. Silla, for now, sharpens its silence. Siondeok is not supposed to be queen, not because she is unqualified, She is frighteningly qualified. Not because she is unpopular, she is admired. No, she is not supposed to be queen because she is not a man, which in 7th century East Asia is less a technicality and more a permanent roadblock surrounded by monks and paperwork. But her father, King Jinpyong, has no sons, and so perhaps out of desperation, wisdom, or sheer stubbornness, he names Seondeok as his heir. You would think that would settle things. It does not. The court reacts as if someone has set fire to their scrolls. Ministers grumble, nobles scheme, letters are written, warnings are whispered. And Seondeok, at the center of this carefully panicked storm, does something radical. She does not react. She studies, she prepares, she watches the sky. When she finally takes the throne, she does not arrive with armies or thunder. She arrives with plans. She knows that in a land held together by bloodlines and metaphors, her survival depends not on how loudly she rules, but on how well. So she begins to build. Her first major project is not a palace. It is not a fortress. It is an observatory. It is called Cheomseongdae, and you are standing beneath it now. It is shaped like a bottle made of 362 precisely cut stones, each said to represent a day in the lunar calendar. The tower is hollow inside. There are no stairs, just space and intention. Some say the opening halfway up was for climbing, others say it was symbolic. Some say it was a sundial, others a stargazing platform. Scholars still debate what exactly it was used for. But Seondeok? She knew. Because Seondeok built it not just to observe the sky, but to remind everyone that she could. If you understand the stars, you understand time. And if you understand time, you understand power. She rules for 15 years, not by declaring war, but by becoming unarguable. She sponsors scholars, Buddhist monks, mathematicians, poets. She builds temples, not just for worship, but for learning. She turns Gyeongju, the capital, into a place where the walls themselves seem to listen. And she does it while being watched, constantly. Every decision passed for weakness, every silence read as threat. There is no margin for error, and certainly none for softness. And yet she is not hard, not in the way steel is hard. She is like ink, fluid, impossible to hold, and able to stain forever. You walk through her city at dusk now. The bells of a temple chime somewhere beyond the trees. Lanterns flicker. A child recites a poem to his teacher in a courtyard. No one mentions battles. But you know this is a kind of war. One she is winning without drawing a single blade. Still, threats loom. Goguryeo to the north boasts a fearsome army, and a king who believes compromise is a form of cowardice. Baekje to the west is rich, restless, and increasingly fond of invading things. Inside Silla itself, the Hwabak Council, the highest nobles, test her constantly. They ask for proof she can lead, for a sign, for something they can understand. And Seondeok politely delivers. One story tells of a rare peony flower sent to her by the Tang Emperor of China. It blooms, but produces no fragrance. Seondeok, glancing at it once, declares, "This flower has no scent. It is beautiful, but hollow." She returns it. The court is stunned, because she is not talking about the flower, she is talking about diplomacy. Another story, stranger still, says she once predicted an invasion based on the shape of a pattern of birds flying overhead. She orders defenses bolstered in a region no one expects to be attacked. Days later, the enemy arrives. Her generals say it was luck. Her enemies say it was witchcraft, but the people, they say it was wisdom, a quirky detail. Seondeok once had a bell cast that legend says was so perfectly tuned it could make tigers weep. It hung in a temple she personally designed. Whether the story is true or poetic exaggeration depends on how much you believe in acoustic sorcery, but either way it reminds you that this queen ruled in layers: stone, sound, silence. She never marries, never produces an heir. This frustrates the court deeply. They send suitors, suggest adoptions. She nods, smiles, declines. It is not refusal out of stubbornness. It is refusal because her rule is not about continuing a bloodline. It is about proving that leadership can be earned, not just inherited. Still, not everyone is convinced. In the final year of her reign, a noble named Bidam leads a rebellion. He declares that women cannot rule the nation, which is impressively bold considering Seondeok has been doing exactly that for over a decade. He gathers followers, rallies troops, posts notices. She does not panic. She calls her generals. One of them, Kim Yushin, responds not with words, but with fire. He orders flaming logs rolled down the hills at Bidam's forces, literally burns the rebellion to the ground. Bidam is captured, tried, and executed. Seondeok, sick and aging, does not gloat. She dies shortly after. It is 647, she is only 41. Some say the stress of the rebellion killed her. Others say she was ill for years and simply held on until it was safe to let go. Historians still argue over what weakened her body. No one argues about what strengthened her legacy. You visit her tomb now. It is not grand. A soft, grassy mound in Namsan, surrounded by trees that do not whisper, but remember. Her name is still spoken in schools. Her observatory still stands. And though Silla would go on to be ruled by other kings, it was she, Queen Seondeok, who made it possible for a woman to write her name across the stars. You look up. They are still there, watching, remembering. You are walking in a place that should not exist. High in the Caucasus Mountains where clouds cling to cliffs and the air feels like glass before it shatters, there lies a kingdom that glows like a forgotten jewel. Ancient, proud, too quiet for modern ears. Below you, winding rivers trace old borders. In the distance, the faint outline of a church sits against sky, more silhouette than stone. And at the edge of a monastery courtyard, where the mosaic tiles are cool beneath your feet, she waits. Tamar of Georgia. Her back is straight, her eyes do not blink. She looks not at you, but beyond you, towards something that has not happened yet. She is not crowned, she does not need to be. She wears authority like a second pulse. The year is 1184, and Georgia, yes, that Georgia, is about to enter its golden age, guided not by a warlord or emperor, but by a woman whose reputation walks into a room 2 centuries before she does. You would think her ascent to the throne was peaceful. You would be wrong. She is crowned at the death of her father, King George III, who names her as heir out of both conviction and necessity. She is his only child. He does not live in a world where daughters are supposed to inherit kingdoms, but he lives in a world where Tamar exists, which is different, but the crown is heavy.
Heavier still on a woman's head. The nobles, the church, the aristocrats in brocade and suspicion. They gather, they murmur, they call for a second coronation, one without her father's hand guiding it, one where they can reassert their role, subtly remind her who the real decision makers are. She agrees, and then does something quietly radical. She keeps the throne anyway.
From the start, Tamar understands something crucial. The men around her will only accept her rule if they believe they are helping shape it, so she lets them think they are. Then she chooses her own viziers, strengthens the court with loyalists, and slowly begins to bend the kingdom toward a different horizon. They ask her to marry. Loudly, she agrees. Quietly, she chooses Yuri Bogolyubsky, a Russia's prince with fine cheekbones, tolerable bloodlines, and what turns out to be a dreadful personality. He drinks, he disrespects her, he stumbles through court functions like a man auditioning for exile. So she gives it to him. Yuri is banished. The nobles bristle, she smiles, and Georgia keeps breathing. This moment, this banishment of her husband, is the first in the idea that Tamar is just a polite custodian of the crown. It is the first time her critics realize she is not a placeholder, she is a cornerstone. You follow her as the court shifts. She is not a conqueror with a sword, she is a queen with a map, and the map is growing. Under her rule, Georgia expands its influence across the Caucasus, through Armenia, into parts of Anatolia and northern Iran. Her generals, especially David Soslan, lead campaigns that would have made Alexander blink. Fortress by fortress, city by city, the region bends toward her without needing to break. Tamar does not ride at the front of armies, but she does something rarer. She knows where to send them. She funds monasteries, libraries, universities. She invites scholars and theologians to her court. Her reign is full of letters written in 3 languages, laws revised for justice, roads built not for tribute, but for travel. A quirky detail. She once commissioned a fleet to be built on the Black Sea, not to launch war, but to improve pilgrimage routes. Pilgrimage, yes. Spiritual tourism, essentially. You try telling your nobles you are spending money on that in the 12th century and not get laughed out of your throne room. She does it, and they do not laugh, because by now Tamar has stopped asking permission. Her court becomes a place of opulence, yes, but not waste. The tapestries tell stories of saints. The coins bear her name alone. The chronicles, written by scholars who cannot seem to decide whether she is a woman or a divinely disguised king, describe her as luminous, wise, beloved, and powerful. Always powerful. She is called Mepe, king, not to erase her gender, but because no other word seems to fit. And then there is the poetry. She funds and befriends Shota Rustavelli, who writes The Knight in the Panther's Skin, a sweeping epic of chivalry, love, and loyalty. Within its verses are subtle nods to her, not directly, but enough. Enough that every Georgian student who reads it learns to associate heroism with Tamar's shadow. You visit one of the monasteries she built now, Vardzia, carved directly into the side of a mountain. Inside are paintings, faded, but clear enough to see her face. Not adorned, not idealized, real, present. Historians still argue whether she truly ruled alone. Some say her generals, her clerics, her ministers shaped the kingdom more than she did, that she delegated, that she followed precedent. But then you walk through the arches of her policies, still standing, and realize delegation is not weakness, it is vision. She knows what she cannot do alone. And so she chooses the best, and then lets them be. By the early 1200s, Georgia is a superpower in the region. Trade flows through it. Diplomacy begins in it. Even the crumbling Byzantine Empire begins to tilt toward it, uncertain of its own survival. And yet, Tamar never invades for the sake of it. Her battles are strategic, defensive, political. She does not play empire like a drunk rolling dice. She plays it like a scholar, always 3 steps ahead. She remarries quietly to David Soslan, a noble with both military talent and the good sense to know who the real ruler is. Together they raise 2 children. Her son, George IV, will later inherit the throne. But the court never forgets who gave him that right. Her later years are quiet. Not inaction, just serenity. She continues to govern. She mediates disputes. She writes letters to religious leaders. When pilgrims pass through Tbilisi, they carry stories of the queen who walks beside bishops and listens more than she speaks. She dies in 1213, around the age of 50. Her funeral is private. Her tomb, still unknown. Some say it was deliberately hidden to prevent it from becoming a target. Others say she was buried in a monastery deep in the mountains. No inscription, no statue, but she does not need one. Her memory became a flag. Even after Georgia falls to the Mongols, after kingdoms rise and borders shift and centuries pass, Tamar's name endures. In modern Georgia, she is called Tamar the Great. Children learn her story before they learn their own. Her image is carved into churches, painted onto walls, whispered into songs, and when something in the country survives despite everything, it is said to be as stubborn as Tamar. You sit now in the shadow of her memory. The stone beneath you is warm from the sun. A breeze moves through the trees, and the silence here is not empty. It is filled with something vast and soft and undefeated. She is gone, and she is everywhere. You are walking through a throne room that has clearly read too much about itself. Everything gleams. The walls are lined with gold leaf, so polished it reflects your indecision. There are mirrors inside mirrors. There are chandeliers that look like they belong in a musical about chandeliers. And there, in the middle of all this restrained excess, is Christina of Sweden, draped in velvet, surrounded by baffled courtiers, halfway through a philosophical monologue about stoicism and absolutely refusing to sit still long enough to be what anyone expects her to be. This is not a queen who was born to conform. This is a queen who was born to ask, what happens if I just leave? Let us rewind a little. She is born in 1626, the only legitimate child of King Gustavus Adolphus, Sweden's great warrior king, a Protestant icon, and a man who names his infant daughter his heir before she even has teeth. Christina's early life is, to put it mildly, unconventional. When her father dies in battle, wearing armor mid-campaign as you do, Christina becomes queen at the age of 6. Of course, she is too young to rule, so a regency is established, but even as a child, she is not treated like a delicate future bride. Her father made his wishes clear: raise her like a prince, and the regents obey. She is educated in statecraft, philosophy, theology, politics, fencing, and horseback riding. She studies Latin and Greek, debates scripture with bishops, and learns to read people faster than most people read books. She reads obsessively, writes endlessly, sleeps irregularly, and questions everything. A court physician once wrote, she studies 10 hours a day, eats little, sleeps less, and shows no interest in fashion, which in 17th century monarch terms is the equivalent of being declared a full-blown alien. When she officially takes power at the age of 18, Sweden is in the middle of the 30 Years' War, and Christina is inheriting more than a crown. She is inheriting a Protestant identity, a militarized economy, and an army of advisors who mostly just want her to marry a suitable prince and be manageable. She does none of those things. From the very beginning, Christina governs like someone who is simultaneously trying to rule and escape ruling at the same time. She reorganizes court expenses, she invests in the arts and philosophy, she opens Sweden to the European intellectual movement known as the Enlightenment before most kings have figured out how to spell it. She invites thinkers, musicians, mathematicians. Most famously, she invites René Descartes to tutor her in philosophy. He arrives in Sweden in the middle of winter and promptly dies of pneumonia, possibly because Christina insisted on holding their lessons before dawn in an unheated palace. Historians still argue whether she felt bad about that. She refuses to marry, refuses to even pretend. The court, scandalized, tries to work around her. At one point, they suggest a political marriage to her cousin, Charles Gustavus. She considers it, laughs, and then politely informs everyone that she has no intention of turning herself into a royal baby factory. A quirky note? Christina often wore men's clothing, publicly, confidently. She preferred riding boots to petticoats, carried a sword, styled her hair short. She walked like a general and spoke like a scholar, and no one ever really knew what she would do next. She has close relationships with several women, most notably Ebba Spare, her lady-in-waiting. The two exchanged letters filled with longing, devotion, and affection intense enough to make modern biographers shift awkwardly in their chairs. Were they lovers? Was it romantic? Historians debate it constantly, but one thing is certain. Christina did not fit into any category that the 17th century was prepared to accommodate. And then, in 1654, after just 10 years of rule, she makes a decision that shocks the entire continent. She abdicates. She gathers the nobles, hands over the crown to her cousin, yes, that Charles, and makes it very clear that she is not just stepping down, she is stepping away from the throne, from Sweden, from expectations. At her abdication ceremony, she removes each symbol of monarchy herself, the scepter, the orb, the sword. Then she walks out of the room and out of the country, literally. Within weeks, she is gone. She heads south, to Rome, where she converts to Catholicism in secret, then announces it publicly with as much drama as possible. In a time when Sweden is militantly Protestant, this is equivalent to setting fire to your own diplomatic passport and dancing on the ashes. The reasons for her conversion? Complicated. Some say it was sincere faith, others think it was rebellion, or longing for the grandeur of the Catholic world. A few believe she simply preferred Rome's libraries and art collections to Sweden's chilly piety. Whatever her motives, the Vatican welcomes her with open arms. The Pope declares her a princess of the Church. She rides into Rome with flair, immediately hosts a salon, and begins reshaping her identity again, not as a queen in exile, but as a philosopher in residence. Her Roman court is a swirl of music, philosophy, argument, and barely veiled drama. She attends operas, debates bishops, funds artists, collects sculptures, tries to get herself named Queen of Naples, fails, tries to become the leader of a Catholic order, also fails. She has people assassinated, yes, really. At one point she orders the execution of a man named Monaldeschi, her master of the horse, whom she accuses of betrayal. She has him killed in the hallway of a French palace, without trial, just decided, ordered, done. It damages her reputation permanently. Even in Rome, which has a high tolerance for theological contradictions and political melodrama, people begin to back away, but she keeps writing, keeps hosting, keeps living exactly as she wants. She never returns to Sweden, not once. She refers to it as the land of my youth, but never as home. She lives the rest of her life in Palazzo Corsini, a lavish Roman villa filled with books, sculptures, and the occasional argument with visiting scholars. She becomes friends with cardinals, corresponds with Voltaire, outlives several popes, never marries, never apologizes. When she dies in 1689, she is 62 years old. The Vatican grants her the extraordinary honor of being buried in St. Peter's Basilica, one of only a handful of women to receive that distinction. Her tomb is simple, regal, tucked beside the marble effigies of popes and saints. You walk through the basilica now. The floor hums beneath your feet. The air is thick with incense and legacy. And there, among the saints, she sleeps, Queen Christina of Sweden, who reigned like a question mark and left like an exclamation point. She's remembered today as a philosopher queen, a queer icon, a religious defector, a gender non-conforming monarch, a political storm in opera gloves. She left behind no heir, no dynasty, no successor. But she left behind a story that refuses to sit down. You sit in her library now. The pages of a philosophy book still open where she last left them, centuries ago. And in the silence between paragraphs you hear her voice. Why stay where you are not free? And then she is gone again, just like before. You are standing on a hill that remembers. The grass here is coarse and greyish, not from age, but from attitude. It does not sway so much as stand its ground. The wind howls across the ridge, not in melody, but in warning. Somewhere below, a road coils like a scar through the fields. Roman built. Straight. Permanent. Or so they believed. And then she crests the hill. You do not see her at first, only the outline of her chariot, twin horses, 2 daughters clinging to the frame, and in the center, taller than the sky behind her, is Boudica. Her hair is unbound. Her voice, when it comes, is a weapon that does not need metal. She is not here to plead. She is here to erase. This is Roman Britain, somewhere around 60 or 61 CE, and the empire has stretched its legions into the far west like a hand reaching too far into a thorn bush. They have taken the south. They have built towns, forts, roads, walls. They have renamed rivers, redefined borders, ignored agreements. Boudica, queen of the Iceni, watched all of this patiently, until patience became poison. Her husband, Prasutagus, had ruled peacefully under Roman oversight, what they called protection, and what any honest Briton called occupation in a clean toga. When he died, he left his kingdom to both his daughters and to Rome, hoping to keep the peace. That gesture, noble as it was spat on almost immediately. The Romans ignored the will. They seized the land, plundered the treasury, whipped Boudica in public, assaulted her daughters, looted the homes of her nobles. It was not policy, it was humiliation disguised as law. And that is when the fire started. Not a metaphorical one, a literal one. You can almost feel it warming your face now, rising through the memory of torched cities. But it began with Boudica, silently, furiously, riding from tribe to tribe, gathering warriors, words, vengeance. She did not promise freedom, she promised retribution. And the tribes listened. The Iceni joined her. So did the Trinovantes, long resentful neighbours of Roman Colchester. Then others, some for justice, some for loot, all for the chance to be part of something bigger than submission. Historians estimate she commanded 100,000 warriors, perhaps more. Farmers, hunters, women and men alike, spears sharpened, bodies painted, spirits raised not by patriotism, but by rage. Her first target was Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, then a model Roman settlement. They asked Rome for reinforcements. They received a polite letter. Then Boudica arrived. She levelled it. The Temple of Claudius, a monument to the emperor who conquered Britain, was turned into a human oven. Survivors were hunted down in alleyways. Fires spread faster than prayers. The entire city became smoke. The Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, was away, subduing Anglesey in the west. He heard the news, turned around, began the long ride back, too slow. Boudica headed south, next stop, Londinium. Then just a few decades old, Londinium was a trading hub, bustling, prosperous, poorly defended. Paulinus made a hard choice. He could not defend it. He evacuated, left. Boudica arrived. Londinium vanished in flame. The city was stripped, scorched, levelled. Skeletons in ditches, roof beams like matchsticks. The ashes went deeper than the foundations. Archaeologists today still find a layer of black ash beneath modern London. The same thing happened to Verulamium, modern St. Albans. No mercy, no survivors. Between these 3 cities, Roman sources say she killed over 70,000 people. But she was not reckless. She carried her daughters with her, never left them behind. This was personal, not symbolic. Every battle, every speech, every footstep was one more inch of ground reclaimed from an empire that mistook silence for consent. A quirky note? Roman historian Dio Cassius described her as tall, terrifying in appearance, a great mass of red hair to her hips, a harsh voice, a piercing glare. Was this an exaggeration? Probably. But it is telling that even her enemies could not speak of her without sounding a little afraid. And yet Rome was still Rome. Paulinus regrouped. He chose his battlefield carefully, a narrow pass, forested on both sides with a clear front and no flanking routes. It was a trap, but a brilliant one. Boudica's forces, emboldened by victories, walked right into it. The Romans formed a wedge. Their discipline, their one great talent, took over. They let the Britons crash into them, then pushed back, then slaughtered. The carts that carried Boudica's supplies and family were parked behind her forces. They blocked the retreat. It was a massacre. Tens of thousands of rebels died. Roman casualties, minimal. The rebellion ended not with a battle cry, but with silence. And then Boudica vanished. No captured body, no parade of shame, no statue toppled, only speculation. Tacitus said she took poison. Others said she died from illness. Some claimed she escaped. Some said her body was buried beneath the stones of modern King's Cross Station, which would explain a few things. Her grave has never been found. Her name? It changes. Boudica, Boadicea, Budag, none of them confirmed. Even Boudica might not be a name at all. It might simply mean victory. But what is certain is this. Rome changed. After her rebellion, the empire changed its administration in Britain. The governors became more cautious. The colonists built better walls. The taxes were gentler for a while because they remembered. They remembered the queen who came out of the mist, wearing vengeance like a crown and screaming into the stone halls of empire that enough was enough. You walk now through modern London. Cars rush past. People hurry beneath umbrellas, and near the Houses of Parliament there stands a statue. Boudica in a chariot, spear raised, daughters beside her. Bronze flames seem to curl beneath the wheels. The plaque praises her bravery, her resistance. It does not mention the fire, but you remember, because Boudica was not here to win. She was here to show that submission is not the only option, that sometimes, even in certain defeat, there is power in the refusal, power in screaming when silence is the only thing allowed. She did not want to die for her land. She wanted to make sure that if she did, the land would never forget her. And it has not. You close your eyes now. The grass whispers beneath your feet. And somewhere in the wind you hear her again, charging. Still, you are standing in the shadows of marble columns, backstage in the biggest performance of a generation. The room smells like wax and rose oil. Voices echo down long corridors, low, tense, urgent. Outside, the streets of Constantinople are not bustling. They are boiling. Fires rage in the distance. Rioters chant like a tide breaking over stone. And here, in a throne room that could double as a theatre, sits a woman who was never supposed to be here at all. Theodora. She is not pacing, she is not praying, she is sitting, still, deliberate, spine straight, as the entire Eastern Roman Empire trembles beneath her sandals. It is 532 CE and the Nika riots are swallowing the capital. The Hippodrome has become a war zone. The people, once distracted by chariot races, are now united by fury, against corruption, against taxes, against the man she married. And now, after days of bloodshed and fire, the Emperor Justinian is ready to flee. His advisors whisper panic. His guards prepare an escape. A ship waits in the harbor. Everyone looks to Theodora, and she says, The royal colour is noblest when it is worn in death. Translation: you may leave, I shall remain. If I die an empress. Everyone stops speaking, even history leans in. Let us go back. Theodora is born around 500 CE into a world that does not expect her to matter. Her father is a bearkeeper for the Hippodrome, a massive arena where entertainment blurs with politics, where the people cheer for factions not unlike modern sports fans with sharper knives. When her father dies, Theodora is still a child. Her mother begs the Green faction to take the family in. They do not. The Blues do. That decision will echo through every marble hallway for the next 30 years. Theodora grows up performing, jokes, dances, allegedly some truly scandalous pantomimes involving grain and geese, though this may be ancient tabloid exaggeration. What is certain is that she learns to work a crowd before she is old enough to vote. If voting were even an option. She travels through North Africa with a provincial governor. The relationship ends. She returns to Constantinople, alone, broke, and hardened. She reinvents herself, studies theology, joins a monophysite Christian sect considered heretical at the time, becomes deeply religious, not performatively but in private, and somehow, somewhere in all of that, catches the eye of Justinian, then heir to the throne. He is enchanted. Everyone else is horrified. Actresses are legally forbidden to marry aristocrats, so Justinian has the law changed. Simple as that. Imagine someone passing a constitutional amendment just to take you to dinner. They marry. In 527 CE, he becomes emperor, and Theodora becomes empress, not symbolically, not as decoration, not as a footnote, but in function, in title, in power. She sits beside him at councils, advises him directly. Her name appears on imperial decrees. She co-rules the Eastern Roman Empire, arguably the most powerful state in the world at that time. She begins with reforms. She expands women's property rights, establishes penalties for forced prostitution, creates a system of support for former sex workers, funds homes for abused women. These are not vague decrees. These are structural changes written by someone who knows exactly how the system fails. A quirky detail? She reportedly never smiled in public, not once. Some say it was a symbol of imperial gravity. Others say she did not want to be seen as soft. You suspect it was simpler. She had no time for pretending. She builds churches, sponsors orphanages, negotiates religious disputes, and presides over ceremonies. While Justinian manages military campaigns and legal codes, the Justinian Code, still referenced in law schools, Theodora manages everything else with the precision of someone who used to survive by reading the mood of a crowd in 5 seconds or less. Which brings us back to the riots. The Nika riots begin over chariot racing, specifically over rival factions, the Blues and Greens, angry about arrests and policy and taxes and a long list of grievances no one cared about until now. They unite, chant Nika, victory, and turn the Hippodrome into a siege weapon. Half the city burns, the palace is surrounded, the crowd proclaims a new emperor, and Justinian, brilliant, cautious, terrified, considers fleeing. Theodora does not. She makes her speech quiet, final, enough to remind everyone that the only thing worse than losing the empire is letting the people know you were afraid of them. Justinian regroups, sends Belisarius, his general, into the Hippodrome, lures the rebels with promises of negotiation, then seals the exits. The slaughter is brutal. Over 30,000 people die. The Hippodrome falls silent. The rebellion is crushed. The empire holds, and Theodora never leaves her seat. She survives Justinian's critics, his generals, the plague, the politics, the slow decay of certainty. Through it all, she remains seated at the core of the empire like a fixed point in a churning storm. But she is not eternal. In 548 CE, she dies, likely of cancer. She is around 48. Justinian is devastated. He never remarries and continues ruling for another 17 years. But something in the empire dulls after her death. The fire is still there, but the spark is gone. Her legacy is debated. Was she a co-ruler or a brilliant manipulator, a saint or a schemer? The feminist icon of her age or a convenient villain for later chroniclers? No one agrees. But the stone remembers. You walk now through the Basilica of San Vitale in Ravenna, not Constantinople, but close. The mosaics here glitter with glass and gold. One wall shows Justinian holding the Eucharist. On the opposite wall, Theodora, wearing a crown that is almost too heavy to be real. Her halo glows. She holds a golden chalice. Behind her, courtiers tilt forward in silent reverence. She looks straight out at you, unapologetic, unafraid, unmoving. She is not asking to be liked. She is showing you what it looks like when someone claws their way out of the dirt and refuses to pretend they were born on a throne. You step back. The mosaic flickers slightly in the candlelight. And for just a moment you think you see her raise one eyebrow, still here, still ruling. You have come a long way. You walked alongside war horses and through palace doors. You stood inside thrones made of law and rebellion. You listened as cities whispered the names of women that history tried, so often, to silence. Queens, empresses, outsiders, heirs. Wives turned generals, daughters turned storms. You followed them through marble courts, muddy hills, starlit observatories, velvet cloaks, and whispered resistance. And now? Now the crown is quiet. The fires are out, and you can rest. The noise of history, which echoes so loudly when you are inside it, has dimmed to something almost soft, like the rustle of parchment, like the tap of a shoe across cold stone, like a voice whispering in a council chamber, knowing it will never be recorded, but saying the truth anyway. You saw Cleopatra navigate politics like it was perfume. You watched Eleanor of Aquitaine wield her legacy like a sword. You heard Wu Zetian command silence like a drum. You saw Nzinga turn a man into a chair because her back was never going to touch the ground. You saw Elizabeth lace her face with white lead and armor with silence. You stood beside Seondeok while she built towers to touch the stars. You followed Marie Antoinette into a silence deeper than any opera. You rode behind Rani Lakshmibai, her child on her back and a sword in each hand. You felt Boudica shake the earth just to remind Rome that the people who live in mist and wind do not vanish. You read Tamar's edicts carved into mountains. You watched Christina of Sweden say no to a crown and yes to herself. And you sat with Theodora, who told her husband to stand his ground while the city burned. And through them all, you witnessed one repeated miracle. Each of them, in her own way, made herself larger than what she was allowed to be. Not perfect, not easy, not safe, but real. They were not symbols. They were not stories wrapped in gold. They were women who woke up in a world that told them no, no throne, no vote, no voice, no right, and they answered with actions that did not always win, but always mattered. Some died young. Some ruled for decades. Some lost their kingdoms. Some were erased. Some were reimagined by those who needed them to be smaller than they were. Others were made mythic, shined up, stripped down, polished, until only the outline remained. But tonight, you saw them whole. You heard them laugh. You heard them make hard choices. You heard them curse, cry, command. You saw the cracks in their masks. And if you stayed long enough, you saw yourself. You learned that history is not always carved in stone. Sometimes it is folded into fabric, stitched into letters, muttered in trial rooms, hidden in footnotes. Sometimes it waits for someone, like you, to notice it properly. Now the room is still. The war horses are unbridled. The scribes have stopped writing. The royal seals rest in their velvet boxes. The guards are asleep. The court musicians have packed up their instruments. The tapestries stop moving. And all that remains are footsteps fading down long, polished halls. Let them go. Let the world shrink down again from empires to a pillow. Let your thoughts slow. Let the dust settle on the battlefield and the books close on the parchment. Let the candle burn down low. The queens are resting now, and so are you. You do not have to remember every name. You do not have to carry every crown. You were there. You saw it. That is enough. And somewhere in the hush, between centuries, between fire and silence, between footsteps and stars, a voice, hers, theirs, yours, says gently, "You may sleep now. We shall keep watch."